What I notice when I see librarians working now is that their function is much more social and communicative, communal, let's say, but also it's epistemic.
I think it's one of the few spaces that any child can walk into and has an enormous amount of freedom to read what they want, choose what they want, engage with the things that really interest them.
If our school leaders support our libraries, the impact is going to be felt across the entire school.
What are you doing as the head of school or someone in school leadership to make sure that it's a place that all staff and pupils go to find resources? Do you often highlight what the librarian does? Do you come to see what the librarian does in your school?
To our library panel discussion today. My name is Jeremy Willette, and I am a middle and high school librarian at Shanghai American School in Shanghai, China. And I'm also a committee member on the 21st Century Library Committee. And I'm joined today on stage by four distinguished and wonderfully lovely library advocates. We love our library advocates, don't we? And I'd like to introduce them. We've chosen these four particular people because they represent a wide range of backgrounds, experiences. Not only are each of them from a different country originally, but they also serve in a variety of roles. We have librarians, administrators, consultants. So we're really fortunate to have this wealth of knowledge, and I'm really excited to see what they have to say. I'm going to introduce them right now so you'll know who's up here. So first we have Stacy Stephens. Stacy is an international school consultant and director of the International Educator with more than 25 years of experience in international education. She is committed to learner-centered, research-informed practice, grounding her work in facilitated leadership, systems thinking, and the belief in seeking commitment over compliance. She values community voice, strong curriculum and assessment foundations, and cultures that support innovation, future growth, and meaningful learning. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you.
Jean-Pierre Adamson, some of you might know him as JP, is the English Schools Foundation Education Advisor, Curriculum and Learning, a role that allows him to champion engaging and inclusive education for learners across ECF's 23 pre-K, KG, primary, and secondary school contexts. His work draws upon a background in educational leadership, multilingual literacy, edtech innovation, strategic planning, and team coaching frameworks to support schools. Welcome to you. Julia Besnard is the Director of Libraries at Herald International School, Hong Kong. She is passionate about igniting a love of reading in pupils aged 3 to 18 through lively library sessions, while equipping older students with rigorous research skills. She also hosts the Hong Kong Lit Club podcast. Join her presentation at 2 p.m. today to learn more about the show and how podcasting can be used as an educational tool to elevate vocal voices in the school curriculum. And last but not least, we have Marianne Grasso, who is teacher librarian at Zomig Public School in New South Wales and the 2025 ASLA Library Advocate of the Year. She's passionate about building reading culture, amplifying student voice, and strengthening community partnerships through innovative library programs that position school libraries at the heart of learning and leadership across the school and wider network. Awesome. So thank you all for joining us today. So we have a few questions that we'd like to ask the panelists. Our first question is, what personal stories or experiences can you share about how libraries have transformed educational experiences for students? And whoever would like to go first, please feel free.
So when I first became a teacher librarian, one of the experiences that really stood out to me, I had a new arrival student that came to my school, and she had no English when she started in our school, and she came to the library, and that year one of our CBCA shortlisted books was a story that came from her background. And I just saw her sit there and with the littlest English that she had was able to follow along with the story And because during that time of CVCA, we had about 6 weeks worth of work that we worked through. And she came to me at the end of that term and she said to me, "Mrs. Grasso, thank you. I feel like I'm home now." So that was beautiful.
I can talk about something called Passion Project that I led. It started off against my will, but I ended up enjoying it here. So this was back in COVID days, quite a while back now, where the idea was to get every pupil in the school to work on something they were passionate about for 1 hour a week. And so our library lessons became that time. So they were all taken over by Passion Project. And so I worked with the whole primary school, around 300 kids. They were all doing something different. So they might have been honing their basketball skills or writing a novel, or they were all doing something completely different. And that was transformational for a lot of kids to have for the first time. These are primary school kids, and some were as young as 7 even, and it would be the first time for them to have all this choice. Obviously they had guidance and help, but they had a lot of agency in what they could learn and decide on the topic they were interested in and produce something, an artifact at the end. And we had a big exhibition with all the families at the end. They could show their products or what they made or what they learned. And they were so proud of it. And it was amazing to see a lot of kids who are not the most outspoken or even not the most academically gifted or who just had their moments. And they could present what they were passionate about.
First of all, I'm going to say I feel a bit like gay crushing here. I'm not actually a librarian. I'm really loving these stories already. What I can do is maybe share some of the things that I get from having the luxury of being able to visit multiple schools across the foundation and work with lots of librarians who are doing lots of great work. So I think something that always strikes me is that whenever I walk into a school and maybe I'm doing an impact walk or visiting a team there to do something, the library is almost always a room that just stops visitors in their tracks. You can't help but be curious, and when you see a library, you want to just peek in and start thumbing the books. I've always loved libraries myself ever since I was a young kid. And part of the reason for that is because it's always populated with children just really digging into things that they love and they care about. So just like the agency you mentioned there, Julia, and like really building the artifacts and showing their work. I love that so much. And libraries are such buzzing community learning hubs, I find. And that's something I'll come back to again later. The other thing I notice is that the PYP exhibitions, I visit a lot of those. And it's very often the case that you can really tell the depth of the inquiry is directly proportionate to how involved the library has been during the process of the PYP exhibition process. You really do curate and guide children in that inquiry journey. And so that's something that really strikes me every time when I walk into schools. One thing I would like to shout out to as well is we have one of our colleagues, Macy, here yesterday, who was for the second time awarded the Library of the Year award. Absolute props to Macy and all of our colleagues at ESF who do amazing work, and everyone in this room and across Hong Kong. And Macy's journey was very similar. Like the story there of development was starting off with PTA volunteer work, and then finally moving through ALES into more connections in the community, and then becoming a teacher librarian. So it's not just students get that wonderful development as well, it's also teachers.
And I'll speak actually maybe from a teacher perspective. So before I was an administrator and a consultant, I had almost 20 years in the classroom. The majority of my career has been in the classroom. And so for me, I think the way I see that transformation is I think it initially transformed me as a teacher, because I didn't have necessarily, when I was teaching in secondary, I was an AP and an IB teacher. I was often a singleton. I didn't have anybody to collaborate with except for the librarian. And so every school that I've ever been at, the librarians always end up being like one of my closest friends, because it starts out through work collaboration and you have that person there to support you. And I think as a teacher, I think it transformed me first in terms of understanding the power of collaboration. When as a secondary teacher, you often don't have anybody to collaborate with. And I think librarians have always been so central for me in my journey as an instructor. And then I think I've just been really lucky to be in some schools that were doing some really interesting and innovative things. When I was at the American Embassy School of New Delhi, we had this massive project that went a semester. It crossed all of our curriculums. It was led by the librarian, student directed, very deep inquiry, guided inquiry processes from the librarians. I just had not really ever seen a librarian be that central in something that was like an integrated project. And so I just feel like those are things that I have seen. And I think why I see the librarian's role the way that I do from my personal experience as a teacher, and really seeing the power of having that expert as central in guiding kids, and really making them central in that process, and the benefit of that for when kids go from middle school into high school, as seeing that librarian as that resource and so central, because it was built in so early, because they led the guided inquiry and we supported them as the classroom teachers and flipping who's the lead. And I think those are the transformative learning experience I would love to see more on the table. Like, how do we have more capstones? How do we have more integrated projects where the librarian is in there as a core collaborator and leader in that? Because I think that is really transformative learning and positionality for the librarian.
I think in my context, I'm the only teacher in the school that actually gets to see every single student in the school. And the library is the only space that every single child gets to be a part of and come and visit and complete their lessons. And it's become a really safe space for them. So going back to my little story, the My Two Blankets was the book. And it was about the culture that child came from. So nowhere else in the school that child felt safe, but she walked into the library and it was her place.
Create another question. People have often said that libraries are at the heart of the school or at the heart of learning. What do you think that means? And has the library's position at the heart of a school changed from what it once was?
I don't know if it's changed from, I suppose it has changed, because before, a library stereotypically was known as a place that just found books in. You had to be quiet in. You weren't allowed to talk in them. It was funny, I FaceTimed my brother yesterday and I was about to sing him happy birthday. He's like, shh, but my brother's telling me to be quiet. He turned around and he was in the State Library of Melbourne. And I thought, wow, my brother is in a library. That's the first thought I had. The second thought was how different it is from our spaces, because we no longer have that space that you cannot make a sound. So I thought that was fun yesterday.
Whenever I hear that, especially coming from senior leadership, my tendency is to ask them what they mean, actually, because I suppose it's a common thing that people like to say, but I don't know if administrators always really stop to think about that, what they mean in terms of practical translation of that. When you say it's the heart of the school, what do you mean? Because, for example, while I work at Harrow, the school is geographically in the middle of the school. Okay, that's it. It's in the middle. Everyone walks through all the time. But what are you doing as the head of school or someone in school leadership to make sure that it's a place that all staff and pupils go to find resources? Do you often highlight what the librarian does? Do you come to see what the librarian does in your school? Are you there when there are author talks and workshops? Do you make it compulsory for teachers to collaborate with the librarian? Do you make sure that's part of? Do you make sure that the librarian's sitting in curriculum development meetings? So all those things that I think have to come from above are tangible ways in which SLT heads of school can make sure that the librarian has the place that they deserve.
Yeah, and it's really nice that you talked about how it's physically the heart of your school in your context. We've got so many different settings. Sometimes it is much more centered physically. Sometimes it's much more of a conceptual heart in a way. But I guess the way I've always thought of it as a metaphor is it's a kind of a crossroads and a sanctuary in a way. It's a space that's protected to allow free thinking and development. And you were talking a little bit about earlier that self-directed learning that children can really lean into and love to lean into. And I loved you talking about the traditional sense of libraries as well at the beginning there, that quiet space. It reminds me of Kofi Annan and what he said about knowledge being power and information is liberation. And where is that more protected than a library? And I think now in the complexity of the world that we're living in, with so much to think about in terms of AI and academic integrity, the ethics of knowledge and how it's owned or piped to children and to adults, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to reframe that space, whether it's physical or whether it's conceptual? That's something that I keep thinking about every time I visit a school. I can't ignore that question. That's really apparent to me.
I think tying with what Julia was saying too, collaboration is so important, but not just collaborating with the teachers. We need to collaborate with our students, collaborate with our parents, collaborate with our executive team, because without that, our schools won't be the heart of our schools. We need everybody on board to be able to drive that home.
I think the idea of the heart it feels very emotional to me, and some of the things sometimes we think and talk about are maybe a little bit more technical. I think it's one of the few spaces that any child can walk into and has an enormous amount of freedom to read what they want, choose what they want, engage with the things that really interest them. And so to me, that heart part comes from that emotional idea that these are really spaces of individuality and freedom when our students don't have a lot of spaces like that. And I think to me, that's one of the things that really resonates to me about that idea of the emotional space that libraries, I think, provide for communities and most importantly, students, because I just think it's such a wide open space of autonomy and freedom, which is why I'm glad we let them talk now in their autonomy and freedom. But I just think about when kids go in and they're like finding books, it's so pleasurable to see how much they love reading or find that right book. To me, that's that emotional connection to the library that I think that's what the heart part is. What's that emotional connection to that space and the freedom that it provides me as a learner?
If I could just build on that for a second, actually just really struck a chord in my head. I think, again, coming back to your point about how they used to be, right? This idea that they used to serve institutional functions and they were considered archives. And that's just not the reality anymore. I think what I notice when I see librarians working now is that their function is much more social and communicative, communal, let's say, but also it's epistemic. You are actually really the curators of knowledge and how it is used and valued and guiding that inquiry in your communities. If that is not protected and taken care of, then we not only lose touch with, let's say, the value of that and the importance of it, but we don't have any replacement either. Students are just left to fend for themselves in terms of working out what is valuable information. How do I know to trust that? And I love that. Yesterday, I saw the slides from the session that there was an Ipsos poll that said librarians were amongst the most trusted 5 professions. And of course they are. In the UK, well, and the US, I think, right? I don't think it's both, right? So even in the US, that's a statement. I think that's really important when you recognize that you had such goodwill and such trust. And actually, we need to build the systems that support and protect that space that you are building and curating for students.
Thank you. Our third question, this ties a little bit to what you were mentioning, Julia, in your last answer. For our administrators in the audience, what advice would you give them in terms of making that room and supporting libraries?
I have mentioned a little bit. So I suppose it is all about being present and mostly starting with really understanding what the library does. That would be the first step. So, as a librarian, I would always try and invite my head of school to come to as many things as she can. Obviously, she's very busy, I understand that, but I think it's very important for the students as well to see her and see that she's interested and that she's there. If I do things like having a rotation of different staff and parents come to read to the kids, I'll make sure that she's the first one to do it, like setting the tone. Well, book day, I'll get a video of her up in assembly talking about her favorite book. I think there's lots of little things that I try to do, reaching out to her, but then obviously she has to then play her part in all of the rest of SLT, of course, coming to see what's going on and then advocating for us in their own ways, as I mentioned earlier.
Okay, so I want to be a bit controversial maybe, but I'm going to go through my 3 steps here. So I said here, the most successful school libraries are those where leadership sees the library as an asset, strategic asset, not just a space. And for administrators, the first thing you can do is invest in qualified teacher librarians. The Australian School Library Association yesterday, I read it this morning, has come out with a document and that clearly states the different roles in libraries. So it has listed library technician and what they do, a library assistant, what they do, a librarian, then teacher librarian, and then teacher in the library. There's a big distinction between a teacher librarian and a teacher in the library. So we need to invest in our qualified teacher librarians so that we can continue to lead this area and also to support those that are a teacher in the library. The second thing I said is protect collaborative planning time. I have been asking for many years to be able to be part of planning days, to get in there and to help our teachers, because I can do so much with them, but I need that time to collaborate and we don't always have that time available. And to see the library as a whole school hub where we can support literacy initiatives, inquiry learning, student leadership, and community engagement. And if our school leaders support our libraries, the impact is going to be felt across the entire school.
I think a lot of it goes back to some of the things that we were talking about yesterday in terms of like, how do we think very strategically, like at a school administrative level, and then how can librarians be central in that process? Yesterday, we talked about their IB learner profile. We talked about media literacy, these things that are actually really big goals in our schools and things that we feel are important, and we don't know where to fit and we don't know how to get them in. And then there's these wonderful people sitting in librarians with all of this access, high degrees of trust. And I think that you're often an underutilized asset in thinking strategically about how do we accomplish some of these larger goals and aims that we have at schools. And so I think I think there's a need for leadership education around some of this and understanding your roles and starting to see the connection points between what you do, what they're trying to accomplish, and how pivotal you could be in that process.
Bit furious and scribbling notes, but I had a few thoughts about this too, and I think you've covered a lot of them. The first thing that I think came up from all of you is this idea of just putting librarians into those conversations for curriculum development. As I mentioned earlier, the best PYP exhibitions are the ones that had the librarians involved from the start. And there's those places in school where that doesn't belong, I don't think. Yeah, protecting the time rather than, and the second point I was thinking about was this idea of what's the identity of the library? How do you mentioned that it had been articulated very explicitly, the people involved, but what about the library itself? Does it have a program identity or does it have service identity? If it has a service identity, then what can often happen, like with specialist teachers, things will get devolved to that. And, okay, we've got planning time, send them to the library. Okay, send them to sports, send them to foreign language block, whatever it is. That's not the kind of thing that we want to be curating in the way that we do collaborative planning, I don't think. So giving a program identity where it's threaded through everything you're doing in a curriculum is a very powerful way to do that. And finally, I think just there's a kind of, so we talked about people, we talked about identity of program itself, but what about the time and the places? In many ways, I don't think teacher librarians have the leadership heft often to defend their own floor plans. And so typically those will get done to them and rather than with. I'm guessing here on I would like to also have that involved as well. When schools are being redesigned, where's the librarian in that process? Because the level of insight that you would be able to bring, not just to your own space, but to the learning spaces across the school would be very deep. And the more threads I would like to see there, the better. But anyway, yeah, notes.
When the leadership is not on board, there's a definite ripple effect across the school. I've been so blessed to work with amazing principals and schools that are so supportive of the library. But on the flip side, I've also been involved in a school that the principal was so supportive, the other executive members weren't. So I was pulled out of the library, and that was felt by everybody, by the students, by the teachers, by the parents who were questioning, but why are you not in the library teaching my child? Is my child now just coming in to borrow a book and going back to class? So leadership really needs to take on board our feedback because it does have such a substantial effect on the entire school.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. So, what initiatives and collaborative opportunities can empower libraries to remain pivotal to a student's academic journey and to the school community in general?
I'll start because I think I've already answered it. It's like, how do we just think more strategically about the role and connect that to just larger aims of our schools and our institutions? I think that's a real opportunity to think through. How do we partner with librarians to do that?
We have a lot of great things going already across CSF. We're blessed that we have so many schools in one city, so I think that helps a lot. But you also have inter-school groups like Alice, and I think that's very powerful. So I'd say that the cross-school professional networks are transformative. I think, if anything, I couldn't think of a better example of a profession or role within a profession that say that benefits from collaboration rather than competition. And also the share of knowledge there is so principal to what you do. And also just being able to visit other schools is really powerful. The impact also talked about earlier is really great, and I would definitely encourage administrators within school groups or across schools within a city to really create a space for librarians to do that. And that kind of means not chaining them to the library at all times, but allowing the freedom to have cover for PD, and this is beautiful PD.
I think we need to ensure that the library and teacher librarians remain visible, collaborative, and innovative. So yesterday I shared some of the initiatives at my school that has helped me with my advocacy. So our student-led podcast, and I'm so excited to go to Julia's session later. Community partnerships has been a big one. So I do Littlelies in the library, where I get the parents and younger siblings who haven't started school come to our schools, and we do story time once a term. I go and visit the local childcare centres and preschools in our area so that we have a little bit of an outreach as well. I've also done story time at the local leisure centre down the road. We're a very small community. So the more that I can get out and advocate and just share the love of reading, it means that people want to come to the library, which is amazing. Curriculum collaboration, like we mentioned before, and celebrating a Regi culture that we've spent so much time building.
And I agree with all of those things. So just to add maybe one more we haven't mentioned yet, depending on what the sort of big thing at all of your schools is. I know that mine at Sohara is very big on charity and service. So we have our huge fundraising event tomorrow. The library can be in a strategic position when it comes to fundraising, getting whole families involved. You're getting the kids to do secondhand book sales, raising money for meaningful charities across the city. Macy talked about that in her presentation yesterday. Bring Me a Book, for example, is one. Kids for Kids at Macon, but it doesn't have to be only literacy. I think showing that the library has a much bigger reach. You can reach out to all sorts of grassroots organizations and be that point of contact. And I think that's a great way to get lots of people involved and shifts the role of the library a bit from just knowledge and we're here to provide resources, but have all of that sort of action happening and service and people helping other people in the community.
Thank you. Thank you to the four of you today. It's been a real honor to sit up here with you. In listening to your answers, you've always brought it back to the street, which is why we're here. From sharing those truths, those transformational stories at the beginning, to honoring the emotional hearts of what a library is and creating that sanctuary to what we can do at the administrative level and even in our programs to advocate for our libraries. I think this has been really valuable. I really appreciate your perspectives and experience. And could you please join me in giving our Instagram?
Thank you.